It was 10:15 p.m. on a Friday night during harvest season. Lit by a single ultra-wide monitor, I opened Instagram. A photo hit me like a blow. My younger sister, Ashley, in a white gown, stood with Brian, my former wine distribution partner. They raised crystal glasses by a 5-tier champagne tower. I zoomed in. That wasn't a rented hall. It was my vineyard's VIP tasting cellar, the exact cellar my father, Richard, swore was closed for catastrophic irrigation flooding. Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I sat frozen, staring at the glowing monitor as my heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs and the ugly pieces clicked together into a perfect, devastating mosaic. Hysteria was a luxury I simply could not afford right now. I took a slow, deep breath, minimized the social media window, and opened my secure cloud drive. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I pulled up the winery's master financial ledger. The numbers blurred for a second before snapping into sharp, undeniable focus. 3 weeks prior, my father, Richard, had called me in a breathless, frantic panic. He claimed the vineyard's main irrigation line had ruptured in the middle of the night, and the historic tasting cellar was rapidly taking on water. He begged for $25,000 for emergency and because I trusted him implicitly with the property while I managed the distribution side of the business, I wired the funds immediately. The transfer cleared within the hour. But looking closely at that engagement photo again, the forensic evidence was absolutely undeniable. The pristine French oak barrels lined the walls, flawlessly gleaming under the warm ambient lights. The polished stone floors were bone dry, reflecting the joy of the party guests. There were no water stains, no industrial dehumidifiers, and no signs of recent construction. The flood was a complete, calculated fabrication. My $25,000 had not gone into the dirt to save our vines. It had funded Ashley's lavish engagement party. And as I scrolled to the second picture in the carousel, the scope of their deception widened. I saw exactly where the rest of my emergency funds went, into a massive down payment on a gleaming luxury sports car parked conspicuously in the background of the courtyard with a massive silver bow draped over its hood. They had not fixed a broken pipe. They had built an extravagant stage for their golden child to shine. The daughter part of me, the part that still stupidly craved their approval and wanted to be included in their lives, quietly died right there at my desk. The business owner, the auditor of my own life, completely took over. I sat up straighter in my chair, my knuckles cracking in the silent room, as I logged directly into the winery's business banking portal. The dashboard loaded, and the screen before me was an absolute crime scene. The available credit on the account, the massive operational credit line secured entirely by the vineyard's hard-earned equity, and my flawless personal credit was nearly completely maxed out. At the very top of the pending transactions list sat a charge that made my breath hitch, not from sorrow, but from pure, unadulterated shock at the sheer audacity of it. $52,000 to Napa Elite Catering. It was time-stamped exactly 3 hours ago. It was still pending. I looked at the clock on my wall. The reception was in full swing down in the valley. They were drinking my top-tier vintage wine, eating imported caviar on my dime, dancing on my property, and celebrating a union I was actively and deliberately excluded from. But as the initial shock began to fade into a cold, hard clarity, a deeper, far more twisted truth about my parents settled over me. Richard and Mary did not view stealing from me as a crime. They were not villains in a movie acting out of malice. They simply possessed a terrifying, deeply ingrained entitlement. In their minds, because they had raised me, my winery was essentially a communal family asset. My success, my long hours, and my profits were simply their dividends to distribute as they saw fit. They truly believed that my sole purpose, my fundamental role in our family dynamic, was to facilitate Ashley's perfect, frictionless life. To them, taking $52,000 from my business account without asking was not embezzlement or fraud. It was just a standard withdrawal from the family bank that they felt fully entitled to make. If I had money and their precious Ashley wanted a luxury wedding, They were simply correcting a clerical error in the universe. It was a complete and total erasure of my boundaries, my hard work, and my basic autonomy. I was not a daughter to them, not a person deserving of respect. I was a resource, an endless well to be harvested whenever the golden child needed to shine. I felt a single hot tear slide down my cheek, angry and bitter. But emotion is just bad data when you are staring at financial fraud. I wiped it away. My sadness evaporated entirely, replaced by the cool, hard clarity of a spreadsheet. The emotional, approval-seeking daughter inside me took her final breath and quietly passed away in the pale glow of my monitor. For years, I had contorted myself into whatever shape my parents needed, always hoping that if I was just reliable enough, just generous enough, they would finally look at me the way they looked at my younger sister. I had funded their emergencies, covered their endless shortfalls, and built a highly successful business from the soil up, all while waiting for a single scrap of genuine parental pride. But staring at that pending $52,000 catering charge, I realized the devastating absolute truth. You cannot earn the respect of people who only value you for what they can extract from you. The grief that had been choking my throat evaporated completely. In its place, a glacial, calculating calm washed over my entire body. The hurt daughter was gone, and the ruthless business owner, the master vintner, who knew exactly how to protect her harvest, took over. I leaned forward, resting my hands on my keyboard, and began the systematic process of cutting off their life support. My eyes locked onto the massive pending charge for the catering company. Corporate auditors and business owners do not weigh the emotional pros and cons when they spot blatant theft. They simply execute protocols. Step 1 was the money. I clicked on the $52,000 charge, and a drop-down menu appeared. Without a millimeter of hesitation, I selected Dispute Transaction, Fraud. I typed a brief, clinical explanation stating that this was an unauthorized use of corporate assets, and hit submit. The bank's fraud department would immediately launch an investigation. While the funds might take days to be officially clawed back into my account, I knew how the system worked. The catering company's merchant portal would instantly flag the payment as frozen, throwing their entire operation into a panic. Step 2 was stopping any further bleeding. I navigated away from the transaction ledger and opened the card management tab of my corporate account. I scanned the list of authorized users until I found the specific plastic they were currently using to fund their fairy tale. I clicked on my father Richard's account, specifically the business card ending in 3,311. The status read active. I changed it to frozen. Then I moved to Ashley's account, locating the card ending in 7,700. Its status was also active. I changed it to frozen. I did not stop there. Simply freezing them meant they could potentially call the banking hotline, claiming a mistake, and beg for a temporary override. Instead, I selected the option to report both cards as lost and stolen, ensuring the accounts were permanently burned and could never be reactivated over the phone. But canceling credit cards is a silent, invisible action. The bank would not notify them until they tried to run a new charge or close out a final bar tab. I needed something immediate. I needed them to feel the absolute zero consequence of their betrayal right at that very moment. I needed my presence to flood that stolen room. I picked up my phone and opened the Vinotech remote facility app. I had spent a small fortune installing this environmental control system 2 years ago to protect my most delicate and expensive vintages. I was the master administrator with God-level access to every sensor and switch on the property. The live dashboard loaded instantly, feeding me the exact telemetry of their illicit celebration. Interior temperature, 72 degrees Fahrenheit. Ambient lighting, set to a warm, flattering 80%, audio system, active and pumping high-volume music through the hidden ceiling speakers. It was the perfect, luxurious environment for an elite engagement party. It was time to change the climate. I navigated to the security overrides and selected a setting called the Archival Preservation Protocol. It was a fail-safe designed for our reserve cellars, meant to protect the oldest vintages from heat or unauthorized access by instantly plunging the room into a deep chill and activating the harsh maintenance lights. My thumb hovered over the execute button button as the scene played out vividly in my mind's eye. I imagined the soft romantic music echoing against the oak barrels. I pictured my sister laughing in her stolen spotlight and my father holding court with his wealthy new friends. I pressed the screen. Click on my dashboard. The status indicators instantly flipped from a vibrant green to a harsh, flashing red. Down in the valley, the warm party lights died instantly, plunging the room into momentary darkness before the blinding fluorescent security lights slammed on, washing out the romantic ambiance with a harsh, clinical glare. The audio system cut off mid-song, leaving nothing but the sudden, confused silence of 200 uninvited guests. Simultaneously, I commanded the Vinotech app to engage the electronic deadbolts on the heavy oak doors, locking the tasting room to an exterior-only exit. You could leave, but the party was effectively trapped in a lockdown. The romantic engagement celebration had instantly turned into a freezing, glaringly bright holding cell. The temperature gauge on my screen began its rapid descent, plummeting toward a bone-chilling 45 degrees Fahrenheit. I sat back in my chair, the quiet hum of my office wrapping around me. I did not smile. There was no joy in this, only the cold, mechanical execution of justice. Down in the tasting room, the music had finally stopped, but my real work was just beginning. It took exactly 20 minutes for the fallout to begin. My phone, lying face up on my desk, started vibrating relentlessly, a steady, angry buzzing that shattered the quiet of my office. The text began to pile up on my lock screen like a digital avalanche. Ashley was the first to break, texting in rapid-fire bursts, complaining that the power was broken, that she was freezing in her custom dress, and demanding I call the electric company immediately to save her perfect night. 3 minutes later, a frantic voicemail from my father lit up the screen. I did not answer the call, but I listened to the transcription as it populated in real time. His voice was tight, the mask of the genial host slipping as he demanded I log in and fix whatever glitch was ruining the climate control because Brian's wealthy parents were getting visibly annoyed and the caterers could no longer see the prep tables. I ignored them all. I flipped my phone face down, muting the frantic demands of a family that only remembered I existed when their comfort was threatened. I opened a blank spreadsheet and typed a single title across the top row. Audit Family 2021 to 2026. For the next 6 hours, I sat perfectly still, bathed in the blue light of my monitor, tearing through 5 years of the winery's complex financial history. I pulled every bank statement, credit card bill, contractor invoice, and expense report. The deeper I dug into the ledgers, the worse the systemic rot became. I found fake landscaping invoices that perfectly matched the cost of Ashley's designer wardrobe. I uncovered heavy equipment maintenance fees that were actually routed to cover my father's exclusive country club dues. They had billed the winery for a luxury vacation to Italy, coding it as a market research trip for new vine varietals. They had not just stolen an engagement party. They had been systematically bleeding my business dry for half a decade. Every time I had skipped a paycheck to ensure my seasonal harvest workers were paid, every time I had spent an 80-hour week covered in dirt and grape, must thinking I was building our enduring family legacy, I was actually just funding their lavish lifestyle. The total embezzlement over 5 years equaled a staggering $240,000. A cold burn settled in my stomach, but I kept digging, pushing past the physical exhaustion. At exactly 4 a.m, when the sky outside my window was still pitch black, I uncovered the ultimate, absolute betrayal. It was a single PDF, buried deep in a mislabeled administrative folder. I clicked it open, and the breath left my lungs. It was a highly classified legal document modifying the vineyard's ownership structure to secure a massive line of credit. Specifically, it was a $150,000 loan taken out directly against the hard-earned equity of my winery. I scrolled frantically to the bottom of the page. There, sitting on the guarantor line, was my name. It was a flawless forgery, capturing the exact loop and slant of my signature. If I did not know any better, I would have sworn I signed it myself. But I knew exactly where I had been on the date stamped next to that fraudulent signature. I pulled up my digital calendar and cross-referenced the time. On that specific Tuesday in October, I was thousands of miles away in France, attending the Bordeaux Viticulture Summit. I had been tasting Cabernet blends across the ocean while someone sat in a room and signed my name to a federal financial document. But a loan of that magnitude requires a certified notary to verify identity. My eyes darted to the notary block at the bottom corner of the PDF. The official seal was clear and perfectly legible. The notary, who had deliberately bypassed protocol, verified the fraudulent identity, and approved the paperwork, was Brian, my sister's perfect, wealthy fiancé. The man who had once managed my distribution accounts. It was a complete, coordinated conspiracy. Brian had used his insider knowledge of my schedule and his legal authority to facilitate a massive felony for my family. This was no longer just a civil dispute over a stolen party or embezzled operational funds. This was bank fraud and forgery. It was a federal crime carrying mandatory prison time for everyone involved. I leaned back in my chair, the cold reality washing over me. The document glowing on my screen was not just a piece of paper anymore. It was a loaded weapon, and the people freezing in my tasting room had absolutely no idea they had just handed it to me. The weekend passed in a silent, icy vacuum. I didn't answer their frantic, escalating calls. I didn't engage with their outrage. I simply prepared for war. The first call I made on Monday morning wasn't to a plumber or the power company to fix the tasting room. It was to my corporate litigator, Marcus. Marcus was a man who didn't deal in emotions, family drama, or empty threats. He dealt in absolute, indisputable facts and ruthless legal precision. By 10 a.m., the trap was set. I sat at the head of the heavy mahogany table in Marcus's glass-walled conference room high above the downtown traffic. The doors opened, and they walked in. My father, Richard, my mother, Mary, my sister, Ashley, and her supposedly perfect fiancé, Brian. The contrast between the glamorous family that had posed for engagement photos just days earlier and the cornered animals standing before me was staggering. They were exhausted, furious, and entirely disheveled. Ashley was hiding behind oversized sunglasses, her designer jacket thrown hastily over wrinkled sweatpants. Richard's face was a tense, unhealthy red, radiating a toxic mix of weekend-long panic and unchecked rage. Before Marcus even offered them a seat, my father slammed his hands down on the glass table, leaning over it to try and physically intimidate me, a tactic that had worked flawlessly for 25 years. "You have lost your damn mind, Samantha," Richard snarled, his voice echoing in the sterile room. "You unlock those business accounts right now. Do you hear me? The caterers are threatening to sue, the event rental company is holding our cars hostage, and Brian's parents were completely humiliated. You are going to fix this, and then you are going to apologize." I didn't blink. I didn't shrink back. The emotional, approval-seeking daughter he was trying to bully no longer existed. "Sit down, Richard," Marcus said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the kind of heavy, ironclad authority that made my father immediately drop into a leather chair. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the thick, freshly printed binder. I slid the 40-page document across the smooth glass table. It came to a stop directly in front of my father. "That is an audit," I said, my voice eerily calm. I spent the weekend going through 5 years of the winery's financial history. Every bank statement, every credit card bill, every single contractor invoice you submitted. Richard scoffed, but his eyes darted nervously toward the binder. "I am a part owner of that vineyard. You have no right." I found the fake landscaping invoices that perfectly matched the cost of Ashley's designer wardrobe, I continued, speaking right over him. "I found the heavy equipment maintenance fees that were illegally routed to cover your exclusive country club dues. The total embezzlement over the last 5 years equals exactly $240,000. "Embezzlement?" Mary gasped, clutching her pearls as if she were the victim of a physical assault. Tears immediately sprang to her eyes, her go-to defense mechanism. "Samantha, how can you use such an ugly word? We're your parents! This is family. We built that business together. It's family money. Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He looked at my mother with the clinical detachment of a surgeon. The IRS doesn't recognize the concept of family money. Ma'am, they call it embezzlement. They call it corporate fraud, and they prosecute it aggressively. The room grew very, very quiet. The bluster began to leak out of my father, replaced by the dawning realization that I was not bluffing. But I wasn't finished. I hadn't even dropped the real bomb yet. The $240,000 is a civil matter, I said, pulling a single clear plastic sleeve from my briefcase. This, however, is a federal matter. I slid the sleeve across the table. Inside was the PDF I had found at 4 a.m. This is a $150,000 loan taken out against the equity of my winery, I explained, watching Brian's face out of the corner of my eye. It modifies the ownership structure to secure a massive line of credit. And at the bottom, sitting on the guarantor line, is my signature. You signed it, Richard stammered, a bead of sweat breaking out on his forehead. You agreed to it for the expansion. I did not sign it, I interrupted, dropping a printed flight itinerary next to the loan document. Because on the exact date stamped next to that signature, I was 3,000 miles away. I was standing in Terminal 2E at Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris, returning from the Bordeaux Viticulture Summit. I have the boarding passes, the passport stamps, and the credit card receipts from a French cafe to prove it. It is a perfect forgery. I shifted my gaze away from my parents and locked eyes entirely with Brian, the high-flying, arrogant investment banker who had always treated me like the hired help. A loan of that magnitude requires a certified notary to verify the identity of the signatory in person, I said softly. I reached over and tapped the bottom corner of the forged document. And look, whose official notary stamp is right here, verifying an identity for a woman who is in France. Brian went completely, deathly pale. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like he might pass out. He was an investment banker. He knew exactly what he was looking at. Bank fraud and forgery, Marcus stated, breaking the silence with lethal precision. When committed across state lines to secure financial assets, these carry mandatory federal prison time. You will lose your notary license. You will lose your Series 7 and Series 63 financial licenses. Your career in banking is permanently over, and you will be facing a felony conviction. No, Ashley whimpered. She looked from the document to Brian's terrified face, her meticulously crafted reality shattering in real time. Brian, tell them it's a mistake. Tell them. Brian couldn't speak. He just stared at his own stamp, his breathing shallow and rapid. Ashley buried her face in her hands and started sobbing loud, ugly, racking sobs. She wasn't crying because she felt guilty for stealing from me. She was crying because her perfect, wealthy fiancé was suddenly facing a felony, and her glossy, high society future was collapsing into dust. Watching them crumble, I realized a profound psychological truth. There is a massive difference between having wealth and being a person of value. Their elite status, the fancy engagement, their country club friendships, all of it was just an illusion, a hollow performance rented entirely with my hard work. Stripped of my money, they had no intrinsic value left to stand on. They were entirely bankrupt, both financially and morally. Here's what is going to happen, I said, taking total control of the room. I slid a final stack of legal papers toward my parents. You currently hold a 20% minority stake in the vineyard. You are going to sign those shares over to me, effective immediately. You will relinquish all rights, titles, and access to the property and the business. Richard stared at the papers, his hands trembling. You're taking everything? I am taking back what is mine. I corrected him. The current market value of your 20% minority stake is worth significantly more than the $390,000 you stole. Consider the remaining balance, the price of keeping you all out of a federal penitentiary. You are walking away with absolutely nothing. You can't do this to us, Mary wept, reaching out a shaking hand. We'll have nothing left for retirement. I looked at her, feeling absolutely nothing. Marcus stood up and methodically gathered his notes. As an officer of the court, I cannot be party to any settlement discussions that involve withholding a criminal report. I will step outside for exactly 5 minutes. The heavy glass door clicked shut behind him. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a clinical whisper that commanded the dead silent room. You can sign these transfer documents right now to settle your civil debt to my company, I said. If you refuse, I will personally walk this forgery file down to the district attorney and the FBI field office at exactly 5 p.m. today. I am offering you a very simple choice. Lose your shares, or lose your shares and go to federal prison. I tapped my watch. You have until Marcus walks back through that door. They didn't even need 5 minutes. The sheer paralyzing terror of federal prison completely broke them. Defeated, humiliated, and stripped of their unearned power, Richard picked up the pen. His hand shook so violently he could barely manage his signature, but he signed every page. Mary signed next, weeping silently. Brian just sat there, staring blankly at the wall, realizing his entire life had been spared by the very woman he had conspired to rob. When the last page was notarized by Marcus's associate, I stood up and packed my briefcase. I watched them file out of the glass-walled conference room. They didn't look back. They walked to the elevators, a broken, silent group of strangers who had finally met the consequences of their actions. I stood by the window, looking out over the city skyline. I had secured 100% ownership of my vineyard. My legacy was entirely my own, and the toxic ties that had held me down for 27 years were finally permanently severed. Have you ever had to audit your own family to get the truth? Share this story if you believe respect is the only currency that matters.